Well, I sometimes enjoy watching black and white films, like those made in the 1940s. I'm not that old myself, but at Ealing Studios in the UK. You know, they're often witty, they're character-driven, and they're sometimes a bit of a pleasant change from the CGI kind of enhanced things that we're used to today. So like this 1949 film that you see up there, Kind Hearts and Coronets. It's a delicious black comedy with Alec Guinness, you know, who later became Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars films. But, you know, he's there, he's playing 8 different characters in this film, and the whole film is he has to murder the 8 people in front of him in line of succession to, you know, so, I mean, what's not to love about that? So, you know. But we call them black and white films, don't we? But really, most of it is actually variations of grey. Or at the very least, it's actually a spectrum from black to white, but with all the different tones of grey in between. And I do wonder if sometimes our vision of the world is similar to that. Do we think of it in terms of different tints of grey? You know, it's imperfect, certainly. It's morally murky, yes. It's a place of compromise. And we as Christians can be also kind of greyish. You know we're supposed to be pure, but in all honesty, sometimes we're really contaminated by the world around us, so we often can feel that we actually blend in quite well with the grey world that surrounds us. But for the next few minutes, we're going to recalibrate, following the lead of the Apostle John, and we're going to fine-tune our vision of the world. We're going to dip into a few different passages that the Apostle John writes, in order to help us improve our vision. We're going to see that God sees the world in a sharper way. There are 2 distinct ways of being, black and white, or more accurately, black and light. The picture that John paints of the world is stark. It is the world in utter darkness. In fact, the phrase "the world" in John's Gospel is almost exclusively used to describe the created world in defiance of God. It's humankind opposed to God, and they are in total darkness. Now, as 21st century people, we have little to no understanding of what utter darkness looks like. Ever since the electric light was invented, we're hardly ever in a place where you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. And if we ever do find ourselves in that kind of situation, we have in our pocket a torch on our phones. But for John's audience, they knew exactly what darkness actually looked like. I remember a few years ago, I was on a camp with uni students in a remote rural area. And one evening I was wanting to have a kind of discreet pastoral conversation with one of the female students, and so I proposed that we go outside to talk about this so that nobody else could hear us talking. Now, it was pitch black outside, no moonlight at all, and as we were walking along, you know, we were talking about something important, but all of a sudden, mid-conversation, just stopped dead because we both fell into a 4-foot hole in the ground. Now, thankfully, neither of us were hurt. That's really surprising because she was tiny. I could have killed her. But anyway, and, you know, eventually when we scrambled out, we were able to make our way. We could see the dining room with the lights on out in the distance, so we could make our way towards that. But it was a reminder to us of why darkness is sometimes described as really dense or thick. You just see nothing. And this is the image God chooses to talk about our world. It's a world defined by deficit, by the lack of something. So what is it that's actually missing? John describes it this way. Jesus, the Word, made everything, verse 3. He made it all. And yet when Jesus comes to this world, look what happens. Verse 10. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. Here is the tragedy of the fallen world that we inhabit. It was made for and by Jesus, and yet it doesn't know him. It's like a very sad episode of Undercover Boss. You know, that's the TV show where the CEO of a company dons a disguise, goes undercover in his company and sees what's actually going on, including what the employees actually think of him or her. Jesus comes to the world he's made, and they not only ignore him, they actually openly oppose him and his Father. So we have here a picture of the world as defying God, in darkness, created for relationship with him, but rejecting their very purpose. And because they're in darkness, they're not going to be able to find their own way out on their own. Unlike me and my friend, fallen into the hole, the world actually has no light to then head towards. There's just stumbling and confusion. This is not the different tints of grey, like our so-called black and white films. No, it's the pitch black darkness of life without God. And yet, amid the bleakness, there is hope, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Darkness doesn't win. Light wins. As Nalini has shared with us, the world without God is looking for answers. People are searching, that's that spiritual interest she was talking about, but without being able necessarily to articulate why they're looking for it or what they're looking for. And that's because we have been made by God for him. It's woven into our essential being. In the same way, we were made for life. You see that, verse 4, when John says of Jesus having made the world, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. What is the life we were made for? It's eternal relationship with God who made us. It's like that great quote from Augustine when he says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." There is a way out of darkness, but it doesn't come from within us, as some New Age or perhaps Buddhist teachings might suggest. Neither does it come from being associated with some particular teacher or group, nor does it come from adopting a particular lifestyle. If you look at verse 12 and 13, it comes from God himself. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood nor of the will of man, but of God. Now, I imagine that most, if not all of us here today, are Christian believers, children of God. We've seen the light of Jesus. So what does this language of darkness tell us as Christians? I think it tells us two things. One, be forever grateful. And two, have a compassionate heart for those who are still in darkness. We've recognised the light, but let's remember that we've come to that point because God has given us the right to become his children. He has taken the initiative, light has come into the world. This is a gift, not something we deserved. John 1 shows that God rescues us out of darkness by coming and living among us. We need to remember that without God's action in our lives, we would still be part of the world, opposing God. Later in his gospel, John introduces us to the language of Christians being in the world but not of the world. We aren't part of that darkness anymore. But let's not forget that we were. If we remember that, it will stop us being judgmental or condescending or smug. As we look at the state of the world without Jesus, let's remember that we are all escapees ourselves, and we've only escaped because God has been merciful to us. Now remember how we've noted that the darkness is thick, dense darkness, the world without God. Now let's notice the difference that Jesus makes. Into this darkness comes God himself, Jesus, the light. Now John uses this imagery all through his gospel. But let's just pick up one of the other references here by looking at how Jesus describes himself in chapter 8 of John's gospel. But chapter 7 gives us the context. Chapter 7 verse 2 says, "Now the Jews' feast of booths, otherwise known as the Feast of Tabernacles, was at hand." And chapter 7 verse 37 sees Jesus speaking on the last day of the feast, the great day. Which then leads us into this statement by Jesus in chapter 8, verse 12, where Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Now, we often miss the stunning way that Jesus is describing himself here because we're not first century Jews. At the Feast of Booths, all the adult Jewish males would come to Jerusalem and they'd build a small tent made out of branches and they'd live in that for 7 days to remember how the Israelites lived in tents after the Exodus until they actually entered into the Promised Land. And during the Feast of Booths, they developed this tradition, this ceremony called the illumination of the temple. And so each night, 4 lampstands, each of them over 21 metres high, were lit in the court of women. And remember, the temple is on a hill. And the light was said to be seen all the way to Galilee. It's a long way. And it was seen as the very reflection of the glory of God. So this is the difference that Jesus makes. This is not the torchlight on my phone. This is actually much more like the far-reaching explosion of light that you see in images of nuclear tests. But this is a good thing. It's dramatic, it's stark, it's glorious. It's a blazing light that is visible for all around, so that people even a great distance away can see it and will be drawn into it. And its scope is universal. Jesus is the light, not just for Israel, but of the world. So let's have a closer look at what Jesus means when he's speaking of himself as being the light. Now, we know that imagery of the light is something that's used not just by Christians, it's used in other forms of spirituality as well. And so what is it that we mean? Or more importantly, what is God communicating when he uses that image of light to describe Jesus? Even in the Bible, the image of light is used in a number of different ways, and we need to be wary of being kind of too precise because there can be ranges of meaning. But let's just look at 2 key ideas that John is picking up: revelation and relationship. In the opening chapter of John's Gospel, we see Jesus is revealed as the Word, and the Word is God. So Jesus is the perfect revelation of God. When John talks of Jesus coming into the world as a man in verse 9, he says, "The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world." And in this opening chapter of the Gospel, what is it, that light that Jesus gives to everyone? He's revealing to them God himself. Verse 18 shows that most clearly, doesn't it? No one has seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side has made him known. So when Jesus is presented as the light of the world, he's showing us perfectly the truth about God. Who he is, what he's like, what he's doing. When Jesus comes to the world, he speaks in a way that perfectly describes the loving Creator. And what is that Creator like? Verse 17, it says, he brings grace and truth. But Jesus as the light also reveals God's holiness, doesn't he? In John chapter 3, God says in verse 19, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. The light, Jesus, who has come into the world, is incompatible with evil. He exposes evil deeds. He exposes the darkness. He is good and he's pure in an absolute sense. Again, we're seeing God perfectly revealed, aren't we? God who is truth, God who knows no sin, God who abounds in grace. This is God in all his glory. But Jesus' goal is not just to perfectly reveal God, it's also to bring us into relationship with him. In my garden, there are some bricks laying about. Now, when I lift up those bricks and the sunshine shines in, there will often be bugs like slaters and other creepy crawlies that will then scatter and just run for cover. The light has exposed them, and they're not keen to stay in the light at all. That's like the effect that John 3 is talking about, isn't it? But is that all that God is interested in? Shining the light in the darkness and seeing people run for cover because they don't want their deeds exposed? No. Because God actually wants a relationship with us. Unlike me, who absolutely wants no relationship with those slaters or bugs, God actually wants a relationship with the world, with the dark world. So when we see in John 1 that Jesus, the light, comes into the world, we're seeing God's rescue plan unfolding in real time. Jesus brings the reversal of the brokenness, of the darkness that sin has brought into the world. He comes as the light, perfectly revealing the God for whom all of this was made. And he invites people to join him in the light, to come in relationship with him. And as we read all of John's Gospel, we see how that rescue plan works out. He dies in our place and he rises again. So Jesus comes as the light, perfectly revealing God in the world of darkness, and he brings us into the light so that we can have relationship with God. But what does that mean for us as his children? So let's think again about our stark colour scheme. Our reality is defined by the striking contrast between black and white. We're no longer children of darkness. We are children of light. Our identity now is children of light. We're not sometimes children of light, depending on whether we're having a good day or not. We are children of light, children of God, born again. We become children of light by believing in the light himself, by receiving him. So I want to just highlight two implications for us. The first thing is that it means we ought to live like the children of light that we are. 1 John 2, so John again, in the letter he writes, says, "Dear friends, I'm not writing to you a new command, but an old one, which you've had since the beginning. This old command is the message you've heard. Yet I'm writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they're going because the darkness has blinded them." John's point is that we who claim to be in the light need to show it. And the main way we show it, according to John, is by loving other Christians. Verse 10, "Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there's nothing in them to make them stumble." And you might recall that John says the same thing in his gospel when he says, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another," in chapter 13 of John's gospel. Now, we saw earlier with Nalini how our society is also hungering for authentic relationships and community. We have a wonderful opportunity to show our society what relationships can be. Relationships where there is forgiveness when someone's wronged someone else, instead of cancellation. Relationships where people in difficulty are accompanied, not just left to their own devices. Relationships where being accepted does not depend on your intelligence or your status or beauty, but on being a fellow broken person who's been brought into the light by God himself. Which brings me to the second point. We are now the light. The language that Jesus uses of himself in John's Gospel, Jesus also uses of us. Let's hear what he says in Matthew 5. We've already read these earlier today. "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill, in parenthesis, like the Temple Mount in Jerusalem during the Feast of Booths, cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." How stunning is that? Want a higher mission in life? There is no higher mission in life. We get to show Jesus' light to the world. And the more we notice the darkness around us, the more we need to remember we shine. And in so doing, the glory goes to God. We have the privilege of reflecting Jesus to the world around us. This is the answer to the brokenness that we see, to the darkness we observe around us. When we look in sadness at the state of our world, we can be tempted to clutch our pearls and bewail the state of things and either look down on our world or despair of it. But instead, Jesus shows us a better way. People can move from darkness to light. And it's not rocket science. We just live authentically beside people. We point them to the original light. We just tell them what we know. Last week I was chatting to Emma, who's a lovely young mum in our church in Coffs Harbour. She's been involved in the local primary school that her girls attend, and she's also involved in the soccer club where her girls play. And as part of that, she's got to know another mum, who's the mum of her middle daughter's friend, and a lady called Georgie. Now, Georgie knows that Emma is a Christian because we've invited her daughter to come along to, holiday kids club and stuff like that. But Georgie has never really been interested. But recently, Georgie's mum was diagnosed with cancer. And life for Georgie has suddenly taken a very dark turn. And last weekend, out of the blue, Georgie asked Emma if she could come to church with her because she really needed some hope at this point in her life. You know what's happening there? Light is shining in darkness. Emma is shining, not with a light that's her own, but she's reflecting Jesus to the dark world around her. And Georgie has recognised that Emma holds out hope. There is no higher mission. So we've seen God's stark picture of reality. A world in darkness, Jesus coming into that darkness, bringing light to the world. And now we, as his children, we bring light to the world. So ultimately, things are very hopeful. Light has come. Let's finish with John's vision of where God's plan is ultimately heading. Let's read some verses from Revelation, chapter 21, where he's speaking about the heavenly Jerusalem, which is our eternal home. This is what he says. God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And a few verses later, the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of the Lord gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendour into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. What a lovely picture of a perfect relationship with God, of living with him in his life, with all darkness banished forever. So as we look at the world around us without God, we might be filled with sadness, but ultimately with hope. We've been brought from darkness to light. And so we never despair because we know the light that will transform other people's life. What happened to us can happen to them. Jesus shows them exactly who God is and invites them into a relationship with him. He is the light of the world, and we have the privilege of inviting people to join us in the light. Let's pray. Pray with me. Father, thank you that you loved us enough to send Jesus, the light, into our dark world. Thank you for showing us who he is and calling us out of darkness into his wonderful light. Please use us to shine his light in our world so that others will know you and live with you forever. In Jesus' name, amen.